Here we go. It's that week. We know it very well as college football fans as one of the greatest rivalries in the sport and in sports general. Oklahoma and Texas, Red River Shootout rivalry, whatever you want to call it these days. It is upon us, and it means a whole lot across the board. We got Jason Ray, of course, on the line. He makes his show go here at Oklahoma Sooners Live. You know the drill. You ultimately produce the show, folks. Leave those comments and questions and debate topics in the live chat. We'll talk Oklahoma football here for the next hour. Jason, how you doing today?
Doing great, Mark. We talked a little bit offline here. It's one of the best rivalries in college football, regardless of the records. But now, obviously, with Oklahoma being undefeated in the top 10, and then Texas getting back into the top 25, really have rebounded really well after that loss to Arkansas. It means a little bit more maybe this year in terms of the top of the conference, and just exciting to talk about it.
When you look at the way these two teams have played and the teams throughout the Big 12, we came into this season with a clear cut. Oklahoma's the best. Iowa State is the second best by themselves. And then who knows after that? It's probably Oklahoma, Texas, TCU. They'll kind of fight it out for third place. Now we've seen Iowa State stumble. We've seen Oklahoma not play well, but wins and losses are all that count. And they're 5-0 and atop the Big 12 at 2-0. So, but if we're just, taking into consideration and evaluating the performance on the field, this has suddenly become more of a wide open race than anything we anticipated. And this would be the first just monumental game that's going to affect and impact the championship race.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right, Mark. And it's very interesting. As you mentioned, Iowa State came in as probably the second best team, but they've looked not terrible. They stumbled against Iowa, of course, and then just turned the ball over a lot against Baylor down the stretch, and they lost that game. But yeah, it's wide open. Right at this point, I think you obviously have to look at Oklahoma, Texas, and then Oklahoma State as probably the three best. I mean, really just in terms of record right now. But all three of those teams have holes, and I thought going into last week, I thought based on the way West Virginia played that hey, maybe they're one of the better teams in the Big 12, and then they go and get beat at home
I
by
did too.
so it's hard to figure out, Mark. It's not any different than the country this year. Some of these teams are up and down from week to week. Don't really know what to expect. So yeah, no, I think this is obviously a huge game for for both teams. And if you're Oklahoma State, you struggled a little bit early on in the year. They've started to find their groove a little bit, playing much better defense. Spencer Sanders is taking care of the ball. Obviously, last week wasn't a good indication of that against Baylor, but he was taking care of the ball a little bit better. But you're Oklahoma State. You have Bedlam in Stillwater, but you still have to go to Texas. So they have some tough games coming up. But yeah, no, it's going to be an interesting race, and obviously this is going to go a long way in seeing one of these two teams making it to the Big 12 championship game.
Yeah, Oklahoma State's been far from dominant, but in terms of stringing together wins against quality competition, again, no kind of murderer's row, but nobody's done that. I always find it interesting when we get into these conversations about evaluating teams. At this stage in the season, nobody's really impressed with too many wins because there's only been a few games played. Therefore, you say, okay, well, they beat them. Well, if they beat them, who did they really beat to show that they're any good? And you play that game and you chase your tail across the nation trying to figure out who's beaten whom and which games really mean something. But I think by definition of what I term to be a quality win, I still consider, despite a few losses, Boise State and Baylor to be quality wins. Right. And Oklahoma State knocked off Kansas State. But again, it doesn't seem to matter who they're lined up against. They're going to beat them by one score or maybe two. It seems like they play pretty much the same game every week. But to their credit, Oklahoma State's 5-0. I did watch the cut down version and got all the action in against the Baylor. game. And I thought Oklahoma State clearly was the better team, but Spencer Sanders, yeah, he did his best in a few spots to try to give it away, but he made some plays with his feet and they got the job done. So this Oklahoma State crew, from the standpoint of who they're beating, it's impressive. The performances are, far from dominating, but it stands at 5-0. So interesting Big 12 race, much more interesting than I thought it would be. And that's a good thing for everybody but Oklahoma fans, I guess. We got a question on the screen, Jason, and injuries are always a difficult topic in college football. But David is asking, who do we know is going to miss the game this weekend?
So from the Oklahoma perspective, Theo Weiss has been kind of a year-long injury. Wouldn't really expect him back for quite a while. I think the things that Danny Stutzman has been out for the last couple of weeks for Oklahoma. I think he was close to being back against Kansas State. I think they wanted to hold him out just another additional week, just to uh, just to have him ready for this game. So I would expect that he is probably back. I think Woody Washington again. He'll probably be out again, but would expect Delarian Turner Yell back. So I think Oklahoma will have two of the four guys that they've had out back for this game this weekend.
We're not going to derail our Oklahoma live show at all. We talk Oklahoma football here each and every week, and by extension, the Big 12. And of course, with Oklahoma's prominence in college football, it extends to the college football playoff discussion and a national discussion at times. But let me address this real quick. Uh, so James, I apologize because I can't remember every conversation and response that I've had because I do these things every day, multiple times a day. But James had apparently said that A&M sucked, that I tried to embarrass him on a live chat a few months ago. So first and foremost, it is not my intent to try to embarrass anybody. That's not the person I am. And if it came across that way, I apologize. I would not try to embarrass anybody. And a few months ago when I said they beat nobodies, well, a few months ago, I don't know that Texas A&M had played anybody at that point to prove anything one way or the other. I certainly, coming into the season, bought the Texas A&M hype to a certain extent. I thought they were a really good team. I didn't think that they would compete for a national championship, but I thought they were a really good team and would win 9 or 10 games, and they seem to be falling short of that. At the same time, I did point out a number of times, similar to what you were saying here, James, if you're alluding to last season, that Texas A&M beat one good team last year in Florida and a marginally good team in Auburn, and they had a pretty weak schedule for an SEC schedule. So we'll move on from Texas A&M. Okay, anything else here? Oklahoma State takes on Texas the following week. So we're going to see a lot decided here in the next few weeks. So Jason, when you see Texas football, of course, they took a step back against Arkansas and got beat up a little bit up front on both sides of the ball. And that was pretty much the story of that game, is that Arkansas moved the ball in the running game because of the offensive front and stopped or limited Bijan Robinson on the defensive side because of the line of scrimmage play. And then they explode for 70 points against Texas Tech, which I tend to discount Texas Tech, but they're winning their games as well, just coming off a pretty impressive win against West Virginia. And now another win over TCU, kind of breaking a string of losses, and 7 of 9 against TCU. So that's kind of a big win for them, and it was a little more decided than the final score. So your thoughts about Texas's play through 5 weeks?
Yeah, so I think they've rebounded, obviously, to your point, Mark, very well from that Arkansas beatdown. That was really not really as close as the final score indicated for those that really watched that game. But I know that they have rebounded very well. Personally, watching Bijan Robinson, think he's the best. He's the best running back in the country. You could probably get some argument from Kenneth Walker III there for the transfer from Wake Forest to Michigan State. But I think Bijan has proved himself as probably the best back in the country right now. So, I think they probably started the wrong quarterback to begin the season. Now that Casey Thompson's in there, he's played pretty well, although it was a little bit up and down last week against TCU. they relied more on the running game in itself. So yeah, no, they've played really well. Defensively, they've been still a little bit up and down. They gave up, some of them was a little bit in garbage time. They gave up the 35 points to Texas Tech, and then obviously the 40 points that they gave up to Arkansas. So I think the thing that's really interesting about this game, Mark, is I think both of these teams are very, very even in a lot of ways, and some of the things where Oklahoma struggles, has struggled a little bit. Texas struggles as well, and some of the strength that Texas has is Oklahoma's strength on the opposite side. So I think this is, a really interesting, a really interesting game. Obviously is, no matter what, but I think even more so this year, just the matchups and the intangibles. Casey Thompson being the son of Charles Thompson coming into facing Oklahoma for the first time is just an interesting story in itself. Spencer Rattler for Oklahoma a year ago in this game, he was benched, and it was really kind of a jumping off point for him, so to speak, coming in the latter part of the year last year. So a lot of things to kind of break down and think about. But yeah, no, I think Texas has looked like a much better team than they showed against Arkansas. And Arkansas is still a really good team, I think, even despite what they put out there last week against Georgia. I don't want to keep this to Oklahoma and Texas for the most part, but I think so far through a little bit over a month, obviously Alabama and Georgia have separated themselves as clearly the best two teams in the country. But still a lot of football to be played.
We talk Oklahoma football here each and every Wednesday with Jason Ray from Last Word on College Football. So it's Jason at Last Word on College Football. So head on over there. Last Word on College Football. You see Jason here on the Oklahoma channel. We have Tony Siracusa on here on a regular basis. Kevin McGuffey covering Kentucky football. They do a great work there at Last Word on College Football and help me out considerably here at the Voice of College Football. So check out their work. And we're here for you talking Oklahoma football every Wednesday at 11:30 Central Time, 11:30 a.m. Central. So bring some folks in here. We've got the Texas contingent here as well today from the Texas channel simulcasting. So any Texas fans there watching on the Texas channel, if you want to check in on Oklahoma talk, we have it here every Wednesday with Jason at 11:30 a.m. Central Time. Bijan Robinson, yes, he's just phenomenal. And every running back needs space. Every running back needs a push from the offensive line. They can't do it by themselves, obviously, 1 on 11.
Mm-hmm.
I would say from what little has been played this season that we've been able to gather, though, he needs probably less than anybody else does because of the power speed combination. It's phenomenal. And if Oklahoma has a big advantage in this game, that Texas offensive line is still pretty weak. And I don't know how you feel about Oklahoma's defensive front, how it's played. I know coming into the season that we were all bullish on how good the defensive front should be, but that could be a pretty strong advantage for the Sooners.
Yeah, no, I think you're absolutely right, Mark. I think one of the keys, I think, to this game is Oklahoma is number 7 in the country against the run, a little bit over 79 yards per game. Texas is, I think, number 5 in the country in rushing offense at looks like around 224 yards, if I've got this right. No, 265. They're averaging 265 per game on the ground. So whoever wins that battle, I think, is going to be a big indication on who's going to win the game. Oklahoma obviously hasn't seen a running back of Robinson's caliber thus far this year. Probably the closest they've seen to him, and he's completely different. Back was Deuce Vaughn last week against Kansas State, which they limited him to 50 yards rushing, but he did get some yards out of the backfield as a receiver. So yeah, no, I think you're right, Mark. I think Oklahoma's defensive line is still clearly the strength of the team. They have they did not play well against Kansas State. For the first time, I felt like all year they didn't play well. They only got 1 sack, really only 1 quarterback hurry against a against the team. Just against that team last week against Kansas. So I think when you look at this, for this week, you mentioned the offensive line for Texas. Both offensive lines, just point blank, aren't good. Oklahoma is really struggling on the left side of the line. Left tackle, left guard has been a problem, continues to be a problem for them this year. Anton Harrison again, he'll show flashes of play where he's really good, and then he'll show flashes where he's just doesn't really act like he cares, doesn't act like he knows what's going on. They brought in Wanye Morris on Saturday against Kansas State. He came in, played equally as bad, so they had to put Anton Harrison back in the game. Left guard has been a little bit of a problem. Marquise Hayes has struggled, which he's not been anywhere close to, I think, what a lot of people thought was his potential coming into the season. So, I think those are two keys to the game for me. Are two of the ones that I had circled is which offensive line can play better, protect their quarterback better, open up some running games or open up some holes for the running game, and then who wins in terms who wins that line of scrimmage battle. Can to your point, I think Bijan Robinson doesn't need as much space, maybe as much as a Kennedy Brooks and an Eric Gray does from an Oklahoma perspective. So, which one of those lines? Oklahoma's defensive line has really dominated the offensive line of Texas the last 2 years. I think combined, I think Oklahoma has had about 10 sacks in this game the last 2 years. Is that going to be, kind of the same thing that we see here on Saturday against Texas? I think those are some of the big questions that I have that will really, I think, lead to, knowing who's going to win this game.
Jason, what you stated there, and I know you don't take these comments lightly, or you are not quick to be critical of players. That's been my experience with you for a long, long time. For you to talk about the offensive line play, in particular players, yes, just not knowing their assignments, not knowing what's going on, not giving that kind of effort that's required. That seems shocking to me at a place like Oklahoma, where you would think because of the caliber of player that they bring in, because of the attention that's given to football all year round. And we're not talking about some non-scholarship player at a Division III school who doesn't really care. It's quite startling to hear that.
It's baffling, Mark. I mean, it really is. I mean, and we had talked coming here in the fall before the season started, talking about, and we still ranked Oklahoma as the number one offensive line in the country. And we talked about that. I didn't quite think they were going to be that good, but I thought this was a top 10 offensive line in the country. I'm not sure that they're in the top half of the Big 12 right now, the way they're playing it. And I don't put any of this on the head on Bill Bedenbaugh, offensive line coach. I think there's a combination of some things happening from what I've been able to see, Mark. I think this offensive line relied very, very heavily on Creed Humphrey from a communication perspective, and I think they have that missing this year with Andrew Rame. He's going to be good. I don't think he's not where he needs to be yet from a strength perspective. He's not where he needs to be yet from communication perspective. So I think, with that being said, the communication isn't where it always needs to be for Oklahoma. So a lot of times these kids they don't know, where they're supposed to be, where they're always supposed to be going, where they're supposed to be reaching, what the entire flow of the offense. So I think that's one. I think that's one thing. I think, Marquise Hayes was a guy who's it's just that's the most mind-boggling thing to me, because he was a guy who very, very much flirted with going to the NFL, had changed his body, had lost a little weight. He's gotten a little bit more aggressive. early on in practices, and just the way that he's played, not really finishing a lot of blocks, not aggressive, is just shocking. So they've played fairly well, Mark, on the right side of the line with Tyrese Robinson, who moved over from right guard to right tackle, and then Chris Murray at the right guard position. He's played; those two have played well, but the left side has just been, kind of shockingly bad. So, when you put this in perspective, I know the season's young, and they can at this point through 5 games, Oklahoma's averaging 38 points a game. That's the worst and I think Oklahoma people are very spoiled, 38 points a game. I mean, that's not terrible, right? But it's the worst offensive production that Oklahoma has had under Riley since they've been here. So when you put that into perspective, I mean, and that also comes with a 76 point, win against, Western Carolina. You take that one out of there and it still drops dramatically. So I think, a lot of the problems that Oklahoma has had offensively is there with that offensive line, and it's very and it's befuddling for me just kind of watching it coming into this because Oklahoma under Beatonbow, they've not really struggled on the. I mean, probably last year was the worst offensive line that they've played, or the last year as a whole offensive line, and this year it's not really been as good, anywhere near as good, to be honest, as it has in the past. So yeah, the silver lining was they did play a little bit better last week. Offense was much better just overall against Kansas State. Didn't punt the ball one time. There was only the one turnover, so they played better, but they've got to get much better to get where they want to go.
You brought up Creed Humphrey, and I don't know that I have heard over multiple broadcasts, a player on the offensive line pointed out and accolades given to him on a regular basis, and not for just being a dominant player and an individual player along the offensive line who's just great at their position and an All-American, and that's all there is to it. But in terms of what you just outlined, it would seem like every broadcast that I would watch Oklahoma football, 5, 6, 7 broadcasts a year, that I would hear it mentioned, discussed, and it confirmed about Creed Humphrey's value to the offensive line in all those other intangible ways in keeping the unit together, communicating, leading. And so his loss cannot be overstated.
I think Mark. I think he's one of those kids where you don't really know what you've lost until he's gone, right? I mean, I think some of those things, that he's done for Oklahoma over the past 3-4 years is, I think the communication part of it probably was a little bit maybe understated. You know what you got from him from a strength perspective. You got what you got from him from a physicality perspective. So, but I think that the communication was something that obviously I think the coaches probably knew about that. But I think coming from a fan's perspective and just kind of watching that was one of the things that you just didn't realize on how much that he helped the rest of that group on the offensive line, and they're struggling with it right now.
We appreciate the comments and questions coming in here at the Voice of College Football on our Oklahoma show that we feature Jason Ray. Last word on college football. He makes this thing go. And we're here every Wednesday at 11:30 Central Time. And we've got our Texas folks on our Texas channel involved this week as well. So we appreciate you being here. So there's a question coming in, or comment/question, just in regards to the Texas defense playing a soft zone. Whether Spencer Rattler will have the patience to take what the defense gives him, and that maybe I'm reading into it that what I wanted kind of point this in the direction is whether you've seen that out of Spencer Rattler becoming impatient or really playing into the defense's hands.
So he did a much, much better job of this last week against Kansas State. He only got impatient really one time that I can remember, and that was the interception that he threw deep in the coverage a little bit. So when you look at one of the best games that he's had, if you take out the interception, maybe the best game he's had in an Oklahoma uniform, in 2 years. I think he was 22 out of 25, has a couple of touchdowns and then just that one interception. So I think historically, early on in the season and even last season, to Ryan's point here, he's not been in a position to take what the defense has given him, but I think he's learning that, because he's spot on. This soft zone is going to be exactly what these teams do against Oklahoma through the remainder of the year. They're going to be willing to bet that the combination of Lincoln Riley and Spencer Rattler are not going to be willing to be patient for the duration of a game. Like I said, they did that. He did that very well this past Saturday against Kansas State. Will he continue to do that in a game that is emotion is, it can't be overstated how much the emotions can get to you. I remember Jalen Hurts talking about being asked some questions coming into this game, and he had this, his, and just the typical Jalen Hurts coach speak fashion. He had said, I played in the Iron Bowl a couple of times. I have a pretty good idea what these rivalries look like, and he was a little bit rattled early in that game a few years ago, and he even mentioned it after. Said, I wasn't really mentally prepared for what exactly this game kind of brings. So I think that's part of it. You see every year. I think every year you see things that you don't typically see in a regular season game that kind of come to the forefront in this game. So I think Oklahoma's going to have to be patient. I think the one thing also to remember, that I think Lincoln Riley did just a great job from a play calling perspective, and just kind of getting them ready for Kansas State. There was a lot of Oklahoma typically has a lot of gap scheme running attacks. They kind of moved more to kind of a zone. And they ran the ball much better against Kansas State in that zone running. There was a lot of designed packages where they would get Rattler out of the pocket, whether it be just a sprint out, whether it be a bootleg or whatever, because he's better out of the pocket than he is in the pocket. Combining that with the fact of Oklahoma has had some troubles on the left side of the line, I think you'll see a lot of that, him moving. I would say, in typical pass situations, I would assume that you'll see Rattler out of the pocket at least 70% of the time.
Jalen Redmond was injured, I believe, against Nebraska. Do we have any update on his status?
So I'd heard 3 to 4 weeks initially, with his injury. So I don't, given the fact that this just happened, to your point, Mark, a few weeks ago, I wouldn't expect him back yet. Of course, you never know. It's very hard with Riley because he is extremely tight-lipped on injuries, more so than almost any other coach in the country. So it's almost a flip of a coin. I know everybody loves to hear these injury updates and things like that, but he's so tight-lipped on that. It's hard to get any kind of detail. Like I said earlier, I would expect Delaire and Turner-Yell to be back. I would expect that Danny Stutzman would be back as well. But I think Jalen Redmond is probably either a game time decision, or maybe they prefer to kind of keep him out another week.
So we also have somebody chiming in on the injury update, and so Jason ran that down earlier in the show. So if you're late arriving, that's okay, but just keep in mind that we probably covered the topic that you're looking for, and so just wait for the video to post, which will happen about 15 to 20 minutes after we're done, and you can catch the entirety of the show. Okay. Yeah, it seems as though even the Oklahoma fan base is giving respect to this most likely being a tough game.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think it's kind of interesting, Mark. With all of our live stuff that we did, I go back and read a lot of the comments and just kind of get some of the pulse. I think there's a lot of cautious optimism for Oklahoma right now, but they've not seen it. Right. I mean, you've not seen it this year in terms of everything has been close. I mean, and I know that we've compared Oklahoma to that Florida State team a few years back, but you've got a 5-point win against Tulane. You've got a 7-point win against Nebraska. You've got a 3-point win against West Virginia. Then you've got a 6-point win against Kansas State. So, you know, depending on which way you look at it, it's you're winning the games, which is great. You're finding ways to win all of these games, but at the same time, um, the the competition hasn't been as strong. Oklahoma, the teams that Oklahoma has played thus far this year have a combined record of 9-17, whereas Texas, the teams that they've played, have a combined record of 16-8. So you look at this game, and Texas is a little bit more battle tested, I think, than Oklahoma is in terms of the quality of opponent that they've had. But you have to think at some point this season, Oklahoma is going to be able to play complementary football to one another. Is this the week that it happens? I mean, obviously, it would be the perfect week for it to happen. But I think coming in, there's probably a little bit more trust in what Texas has put out there, just from a consistent perspective versus what Oklahoma has been able to put out there as well.
Oklahoma taking care of business at 5-0, but of course the play has been substandard across the board. They really haven't had that breakout game, but and certainly within the football facility, they have to be focused on Texas and then the next game, the next game, the next game. But we're here to speculate and talk about whatever we want, and it could serve them well that Clemson's gone down and that the ACC probably is going to sabotage itself. I don't see it's going to be very difficult for a Wake Forest to continue what they're doing now that they're going to hit some more difficult competition and maintain a undefeated record. Oregon losing over the weekend against Stanford, if they continue to be the flag bearer of the Pac-12, could really serve Oklahoma despite their struggles if they can make it through, where it looks as though the ACC and the Pac-12 are kind of taking themselves out of the playoff mix.
Yeah, I think, Mark, when you look at the playoffs, I mean, unless something astronomical happens, I mean, Alabama and Georgia are going to be in the playoffs, both of them. I would be shocked if either one of those teams lose a game before the SEC championship game, and then you have to assume that one of the Big Ten teams are going to get in. Whether Iowa or Penn State or Ohio State. So when you look just kind of at the overall picture, you think that it's a few teams here playing for probably one spot. I mean, there's a chance that the Big Ten could beat each other up enough where they could lose that, but it's hard to see. With Iowa at 3, Penn State at 4, and Ohio State, they're back in the top 10 this week, I believe. I can't remember what the actual
I think they're up to 7.
Yeah. So you got to think that one of those, but then again, Oklahoma's right in the mix with a mix with a Cincinnati. I've seen a lot of questions about this year, this week. Now, Cincinnati is very much a player in the in the college football playoff, because I would be about as shocked if Cincinnati loses a game as I would is if Alabama or Georgia would lose a game based on the competition that they play the remainder of the year. So I think everything's still there. I think the one thing that's lost in terms of how Oklahoma struggled, and the outlook from the I think from the Oklahoma fans is really one of which that it almost appears like Oklahoma wasn't coming in here last year like they were with 2 losses, whereas they're still undefeated. They're still a top 10 team, and so even though they've struggled, the good thing is they still have everything. Everything's still available for them as much as has been in the past. If they keep winning, some of these teams ahead of them are going to knock each other out. I mean, obviously, one of the two of Penn State and Iowa are on Saturday. So you have that opportunity. They've just got to be able to put themselves in a position to put that together if they can.
With all the football going on in the midst of the season through 5 weeks, have you had a chance to look at recruiting? There's a number of comments in the live chat concerning a couple of commitments coming up.
Yeah, so here in the middle of October, you've got a couple of commitments in the 2022 class. Gabe Brownlow Dindy, who's one of the best defensive linemen in the country. He is down to both Oklahoma and Texas A&M. I think he visited Texas A&M. I think there was a thought that Oklahoma probably had a little bit of a lead on him going into his visit. With Texas A&M. Was from everything that I've heard. I don't know that necessarily that the visit did not go well, but he did not commit or he did not lean towards Texas A&M, and it looks like he's starting to lean maybe a little bit more heavily towards Oklahoma. So that would be just a huge commitment for Oklahoma on the defensive line for next year. Gentry Williams is the other kid, local out of Oklahoma, Booker T. Washington kid who has really been kind of it's really been kind of back and forth between Oklahoma and USC. And I think he had a really good relationship with the interim coach at USC, but things seem to be trending a little bit more Oklahoma's way here. So those are a couple of the big time targets that they have in 2022. Oklahoma just recently got another wide receiver commit in the 2023 class, and they're doing. If this holds on paper for 2023, could be the best class that they've ever had. I think they've got either 3 or 4 5-stars already committed in that class. So a long way to go, obviously with that. But if they can hold on to that, so and these Texas games, these games are big. I think game this weekend, it still means a lot to these kids. Obviously, these rivalry games and winning these games and playing well on the national stage. In one instance, and I think one of the things and I'm very much interested in your thoughts on this, Mark. Not necessarily just from a recruiting perspective, but just from an overall philosophical perspective. And there was some discussion on this from some of the kind of the recruiting analysts with Oklahoma, in that a lot of the recruits are, the discussion on, if Oklahoma makes it to a playoff game and they get beat fairly handily versus going to or not making it to the playoff and going to a New Year's Six game and winning that game. How do you how do you view that? Is it more respectable to make it to the Final Four? Is it more respectable to just go out on a win? And I think from some of the things that recruits are saying, they prefer winning that final game and playing as opposed to just not being competitive in the playoff game. So I think that's one of the things that's interesting, as just looking at the way that recruits think about these things, think about these teams, especially when you're kind of recruiting against Alabama, recruiting against Florida, recruiting against Ohio State, Georgia, all these different teams.
Yeah, I always found it kind of interesting or amusing that to think that a recruit would show up at a football game and the winner of the game would sway their decision considerably. Just the fact that one team was better than the other team on that particular day would sway the decision that involves allegiance and trust of a head coach, a coaching staff, the relationships, the location of the schools, what they want to major in, just the feel of the programs, the other athletes that they know that are committing to those classes that they have relationships with, I would think that would all override a game that was 38-35 and came down to the last, couple plays of the game. But of course, the winning of the football games is an emotional. It's an emotional experience to show up on campus, to be taken through the process of a recruiting visit, then attend the game and feel the roar of the crowd and everything else that is involved in a game experience, whether positive or negative. So I can understand it a little bit better, taking that into consideration. Now, in terms of a bowl experience and winning a major bowl game outside of the playoffs and capping off a quote unquote successful season, depending on your expectations, versus going to the playoff and being embarrassed. Of course, we are answering this question in theory based on hindsight. I have always opted for, you go for the gusto, you go for the championship, even if you feel as though maybe your team's not quite up to it, not quite prepared to go up against a giant program, and most likely the result isn't going to be favorable. But in hindsight, if you know that that's the result versus what Oklahoma experienced last year, there's always the optimistic outlook that if your team is trending up, they played extremely well at the end of the year, won a conference championship, and then took care of business in a major bowl game, but were left out of the playoff, that you can always speculate, well, what would have happened had they made the playoff? It looks like they were good enough to compete in the playoff. And there's a positive narrative surrounding the postseason and the conclusion of that season, like there was with Oklahoma, despite 2 losses early last year, that there was a positive narrative there because of how they ended the season, versus because of the way we view sports in this society. If you don't win the whole thing and you get close, and especially if you're embarrassed, and the score's lopsided, that's almost worse than having not competed at all. The Buffalo Bills losing 4 consecutive Super Bowls became a joke, and they became a joke to many people. Well, they were the second best team, theoretically, the second best team in the NFL for 4 consecutive years. And sure, there were all sorts of teams, of course, advancing to the playoffs that were considered good teams and given a lot of respect, but having lost in the playoffs, they weren't on the ultimate stage, losing the last game. So I think there is something, and especially since Oklahoma has not won a playoff game. If somebody else, especially Clemson, Ohio State, Alabama, were fighting for a playoff spot, or advance to the playoffs, and were on this given year embarrassed or lost decidedly, well, then they could still have the previous experiences and to kind of confirm their place in college football. But there's still a question about Oklahoma, I think.
Yeah, no, I mean, those are all valid, and I really subscribe to your theory as well. I know kids are a little bit different these days than us old people that cover and watch college football. But I'm the same way as you, and I think, Mark, that question has come back to the forefront a little bit more this year, specifically right now, because I think a lot of the thought is, if Oklahoma was able to make it to the playoffs, obviously they're going to face either Alabama or Georgia, and the thought is, another embarrassing loss in a playoff game. But no, I'm with you. I mean, I think I would, and it's different each year, right? I mean, based on last year, how Oklahoma was playing towards the end of the year, a lot of people think that Oklahoma probably could have maybe at least beaten a Notre Dame, maybe not necessarily beating, Clemson or Ohio State, or Alabama, obviously, but maybe could have played comparably against, against a a team like Notre Dame. So, but yeah, I think it's just an interesting. It was just kind of an interesting topic. I'm of the opinion like you. I mean, um, I would rather be in the biggest, most important game of the year and not win it versus being in a kind of a consolation game.
Especially since in recent years, and we saw it more so last year than at any time, and the Oklahoma example being front and center against Florida and the way Florida treated a Cotton Bowl game, that even these New Year's Six Bowl games, we've gotten to the point where, and I hate to see it and experience it because, we started to see some of the lesser bowl games be a bit disregarded in the last several years. But now we've gotten to a point where we even have New Year's Six Bowl games not being taken seriously.
Yeah, no,
So,
you're absolutely, and Kirk Herbstreit has talked about this in detail over the last couple of years about just so much. There's been so much onus. There's been so much talk about the playoffs. It makes some of the other games that are, to your point, big time, meaningful bowl games are becoming more and more meaningless. I know that we talked about this last year, but the number of, and specifically for the Oklahoma when they play Florida in the Cotton Bowl um, last year, it was Florida had a ton of people that obviously opted out for that game. So, even these big time bowl games that aren't national championship implication games like a playoff game aren't as important as maybe they used to be, which is sad because I mean it's obviously you want to be there, but at the same time it's still an opportunity to compete again.
yeah, I again, I'm an old guy. I enjoy the bowl games. I like the games. I don't think they're in a sense. I understand the argument that there can be too many. I don't want 5-win teams playing in bowl games, but in a sense, for me, there's not too many because then you can always have the argument that if there's too many bowl games for you, then just don't watch the ones you don't want to watch. Uh, but I like bowl season. I love it. I love the competition between conferences and teams that we otherwise would not see play. It's just another opportunity to see good teams play cross-sectional games. And then for me, I may be a little bit more invested in this than many people. Why, I don't know, but I like to compare the conferences and get a read on the conferences. And there was a time in which these bowl games were almost 100% valid. Now the validity of them has dropped off. What my argument always was for the bowl games being valid was that unlike regular season games that are scheduled so far in advance, you don't know if you're going to have the best team in the Big Ten playing the eighth best team in the Big 12 when Oklahoma and signs to play Michigan State. I'm just throwing two teams out. You don't know
Sure.
what they're going to, but in a bowl game setting, the seeding may be off by one, maybe, but we have like seeded teams playing. So theoretically, they should be valid matchups that can tell us something about, by extension, the conferences because they're playing like seeded teams. So they're good matchups on paper. But with a number of players now not participating, some of them are, some of them aren't, unfortunately.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. It's just I mean, and part of that kind of goes into the conversation is that since some of these teams aren't as um, some of these players aren't as motivated if it's not a playoff game. Maybe that one's more of a reason for a little bit of an expansion. I don't know. But I think it is. It is what it is right now. But
I guess my last comment on that topic is somewhat in a sense, don't understand the player's mindset because if their choice is to prepare for the NFL draft and to sit out a game that they deem meaningless. I understand that these bowl games could be considered meaningless, although the game does count on the team's record. So they do count. So once your team is out of the conference championship race, would those games not be meaningless as well? There are more people that are going to watch. Okay, North Carolina and Texas A&M played in the Orange Bowl. Both of those teams were eliminated from their conference races fairly early, despite being good teams. They lost key games and were out of it with 2, 3, 4 weeks left to play. Well, they end up playing in the Orange Bowl. More people are watching that Orange Bowl game than are going to watch North Carolina play Wake Forest and play NC State and everybody else that they play the last month of the season. And those games were meaningless. They couldn't win the ACC. Texas A&M had lost to Alabama. They weren't going to win the SEC. So how are those games any more meaningful than the bowl games?
Oh, I'm with you completely. I'm with you. I love the bowl games as well.
Yeah. Oklahoma and Texas, noon Eastern time, 11 Central. Once again, Oklahoma forced to get up early and play an early game, but they're used to this one. It's always been at noon. It's been at noon forever, it seems.
It's always either
11 a.m. Central.
Yeah, it's either 11 a.m. Central or 2:30. Just and I think the reason why that they've never had a night game there is it's located in such a bad area that neither Oklahoma or Texas has ever been willing to have this game be a night game. Maybe at some point they would just try it and see what happens, but just the area of where the Cotton Bowl is just it's not a really good area to be in at 9-10 o'clock at night. So but yeah, no, it's still like I've been to this game on numerous occasions. I think I'm obviously very I'm very jaded in my thought, but I think it's the best rivalry in college football just because of the uniqueness of everything that's part of it. It's a neutral site game. That's not completely unique in itself, but the state fair as the backdrop of this game is unique. The splitting of the stadium down the middle, 50% on each side. I think there's just so many different intriguing parts of the game in a specifically this year with everything that there is with it, a lot of the intangibles as well. So it's these teams, like I said, these teams are so incredibly even. I feel like that this year. I mean, I think it's going to come down. I wouldn't be surprised if I would be surprised if it's more of maybe a 3 to a 6 point game either side. I'm gonna give myself a little kind of pub here so I'm doing I'm planning on doing on Friday afternoon. I'm going to do a show here and talk a little bit about some of my keys to the game, and then really just kind of talk about just in general what some of the best Red River shootout memories that I've had in the past from myself watching games, and have people share theirs, and then maybe at the end we'll offer a little bit of a prediction there.
There you go. That's it. Last word on college football. So join Jason there and join him right here at the Voice of College Football following the Red River shootout game. And he'll be doing his post-game show as he does each and every week after the Oklahoma game. So join him right here. Bring your comments and your questions following Oklahoma and Texas. Everybody come on back next Wednesday at 11:30 a.m. Central. Bring some friends with you, and we'll talk Oklahoma football. Jason, it's always appreciated. The show doesn't work without you.
Thank you, Mark. I appreciate it.